Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Welcome to the Feds, where information meets action. I am Stephanie Weidel, joined by Jim Erdman. Today, we are very privileged to have with us Holly Felmlee, former Department of Defense Education Activities, or DODEA, employee. Holly was in Belgium when Biden's vaccine mandates were announced. Ultimately, Holly was fired for not getting the COVID jab. Holly, you have an incredible story. We can't wait to dive in. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Would you give us a little bit of your background, educational background, and where you started, family background, and where you started when COVID hit in 2020?
Sure. So I am happily, wonderfully married to my amazing husband, and we have 3 beautiful daughters. Right now, we're currently living in the free state of Florida, purposely, on purpose to be able to exercise our natural freedoms. But originally, we started off in the government world. When my husband was in the Navy for 9 years, he got out, and then he went back to school to become an engineer. And we knew as soon as we started a family, we didn't want to stay in the States. We knew that it was probably not the best place to raise kids. It's been going downhill, and so we decided we wanted to go overseas. The first opportunity we had was to go to Okinawa, Japan, and I thought, that sounds great. It's a tiny little island south of mainland, and most of the people speak English. They've got a DODEA school, which is Department of Defense Education. So they're basically American schools on military bases around the world. So we decided to go ahead and give that a try in 2018. I think that was, 2018. So we headed off to Okinawa, Japan, got there. Everything was great. It was really amazing. The lifestyle was amazing. The culture was amazing. My kids, they're little, they could have walked out in the street. I mean, they have 2 and 3-year-olds walking home from school by themselves. You don't have to worry about them getting kidnapped or trafficked or anything like that. So we absolutely loved it. So I started working for DODEA, which is Department of Defense Education Activity, in December.
And could you talk a little bit about what you did and what your job was?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. So I can go back. I actually have a bachelor's degree from Texas A&M in business administration. A couple years after that, I went back to A&M and got my master's degree in business administration. Up until that point, I had worked mostly for headquarters of restaurant industries. So the owners of Chris Ruth's, Texas Landed Cattle was a big one, and Lone Star Steakhouse. So I worked in their guest relations department. I was the director of their guest relations. So anytime someone called for a complaint, that was my main role. I'd been in the service industry since I was 16. It was how I put myself through college. I worked at Olive Garden for 6 years. So that was kind of my bread and butter, was customer service. And so when I went to DODEA and I got this job, the title was financial analyst, but it was really more of a payroll role. And it was a lot of customer service because I was dealing with a lot of teachers who called in about payroll issues. It wasn't just payroll. It was any debt issues they might have. We did also little odds and ends of, filing paperwork to get people paid for, like if they did soccer, for example, they get a stipend. So it was just a little bit of odds and ends, but it was a big customer service focused role. And so that's how I ended up in that role once we got to Japan. My husband was already working. We'd been there about a year. And I fell right into that role and absolutely loved it. It was a great job. The lady who kind of mentored me. This was my first government role also, by the way. And it was completely different, I will say, than anything in the private sector. I mean, I went into it with a master's degree business kind of mindset. And I know you and I were talking previously, but it is very much like being enlisted. It is very, very much like that. It's not like private sector at all. I remember I had asked a guy to make a copy for me, and he was like in the room next to us. He did something else, and I got in trouble for not going through the chain of command, asking for this man to make a copy for me. So I was very, very jarring to get into that role and kind of learn, okay, there are rules here. You follow chain of command, even if it's for the dumbest thing. The director of the region was there. I wasn't allowed to speak with her because she was like such a high rank. So she would host meetings, but we weren't really allowed to I don't know. I almost felt like I couldn't make eye contact with her. You know, it was just she was very high up. And so I was low on the totem pole at that point. So really you had to just stick with your group, and it was fine. I got used to it. I learned the rules very quickly. But I would tell my husband some things and he'd be like, that's the way it is. Welcome to government work. Welcome to, military life. You don't question it. You just, even if it doesn't make sense, it's not fair. That is what it is.
Was there any vaccine policy at that point for your work there? Were you even required for the flu shot?
No, you know what? I think we were, and I know my kids were, but we've always had religious exemptions for the children for flu shots and for myself. So if there was, I would have filled one out, and it's a piece of paper. Like, this is what it should have been for me with the COVID vaccine. It was literally, I've done this a million times for the kids. I've done it for myself. It's a piece of paper. You fill it out, you turn it in. You don't have to get the flu shot. So if there was, that would be the only, to where it doesn't even make a stamp in my memory because it was a very basic thing that you did,
The overseas, I was posted in Tokyo quite a while back, and the only overseas, they don't have vaccine mandates prior to this. They had recommendations. So I think when I went out there, I think there was an encephalitis vaccine that they were recommending people take, but nothing was truly mandated until
the only thing that would be mandated is if you're a civilian family and you go to like Bahrain, there are certain vaccines that you are required to get. And I think typhoid and maybe encephalitis too. Malaria would be another one we had to, that you would have to get. But other than that, there was never any basic, like you need to have your Hep B shot or your tetanus shot or anything like that. That was not a requirement. We did have to get physicals to go to Japan, but they were very basic. My husband's a little more thorough than mine was. And then they do like, if you have a kid that has like autism or any kind of special diagnosis, sometimes they won't send you if you're going to a station where there's not adequate resources to help your child. And so those are the only things really medical wise that kind of impact where you go, or, in my experience for us, when our kids are happy and healthy. So we didn't have to worry about that, but I knew that was, an issue that could come up for some people.
So what did you start seeing in March of 2020?
So at that point, I had been with the, I'm going to call it DODEA. So if I say DODEA, it means Department of Defense Education Activity. It's just a mouthful, so it's easier to say DODEA. So again, I'd started in December. And I think the madness kind of was a little bit before that, right? I don't even know the timeline of COVID because we were on this tiny island and we had 0 cases for 6 months into the pandemic. Again, I don't know when it started. I thought it started before that. But I remember January, February, talking to my mom on the phone, and she was telling me these stories of like people were pushing her over for toilet paper. You couldn't buy toilet paper in the States, which is very strange. But, we never had lack of toilet paper. We didn't have lack of water. And I would hear this stuff and I'm like, that's crazy. Like, dumb Americans, like, what are they doing over there? And so I was just like, whatever. And everyone was saying like stuff is shutting down. And we were 6 months without a case. And I just really thought it was going to kind of fade away. I wasn't really worried about it in March of 2020. It wasn't even on my radar, really. Everything was open. We could still do whatever we wanted. Whatever that holiday is after March, Labor Day or Memorial Day. Okay, so we had a bunch of Marines come in. Japan, or especially Okinawa, was very strict at that point of a 14-day quarantine. But again, I hadn't left the island, really needed to worry about it. But they had a 14-day quarantine, and it was Memorial Day. And the military guys decided they weren't going to quarantine, and they all went off to a party. And the next thing you know, COVID is spreading, quote unquote, like wildfire, all over Okinawa, Japan. I never got sick. My husband never got sick. My kids never got sick. But even at that point, once people started testing positive, and whatever month that would be what, March, April, May-ish, it still hadn't hit us. They started closing down the schools to do Zoom, but we still weren't crazy masking. Japan's always been a country that's masked in general. I mean, before the pandemic, if a person was sick, you'd see them walking with a mask, and it kind of really didn't phase you, and it never was required for us at that point. But then when stuff started closing down, I had a trip to Thailand planned, and I'd been planning it for a year, and I started getting emails saying that they're shutting down the hotels in Thailand. And, so I'm hearing from America, hearing that Thailand's shutting down. I'm hearing from my Japanese coworkers that the mainland is shutting down. And at that point, I kind of thought, okay, we need a plan. We need to know what's going to happen. We're already on this tiny island. I cannot be locked down here. I mean, really, to get off the island, you've got to at least get on a plane to go at least 2 hours north to Japan. If that's locked down, like, what are we going to do? And we decided it was time to go. It was time to go. We started looking seriously at getting out of Japan.
I looked at the data for all of Japan. It's not showing here on Okinawa, but there was no serious case rise. You had, for Japan as a whole, it wasn't till, let's see, July that they exceeded 7,000. May, it was, I believe, if I'm reading this correctly, 538. Then we're talking about all of Japan.
Yeah, they included Okinawa in with the numbers, because I remember my coworker was super honed in on it, and just every day, she would tell me, Holly, do you know that this is the count? And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. What are you telling me? Like, we're on this island, are you giving me the island numbers? And she would just say, well, it's just really bad. It's really bad. And I'm like, I don't like looking around. I'm on this beautiful island with blue water. I'm like, doesn't look that bad, And we didn't have a TV. Like, even our TV now, like, we have Netflix or whatever's on there, but we haven't paid for cable in probably 20 years, and we don't watch the news. So from what I understand, afterwards, when I was looking back on this, there was a ticker apparently on CNN that just had numbers of deaths going and going and going.
That was your best protection. That was your best protection to COVID. Not having
I don't know. I would say we did. So I had no idea, that fear was not put into my brain ever. I was living by common sense. I was living by what I was seeing around me. And I don't really tend to go with, my mom's extra. So she was like, you need to go and, batten down and get all this water and toilet paper. And in case, talking like the apocalypse is going to happen. And I'm just like, no, like, it's just no. And the other thing too is, although we were leaving, it wasn't that we were leaving out of fear of COVID. We were leaving out of self-preservation of, like, we are not going to have our kids have this apocalyptic experience that I was seeing a lot of people having. The fear in people's voices, the fear that they need to, shelter their kids and put them in a bubble, and they need to, make them think they're going to kill grandma. And I was like, we will not raise our kids like that. And so we constantly told our kids, you're fine. Everything is fine. Is mommy sick? No. Is daddy sick? No. Everything is fine. Grandma's not sick. Nobody's like, and I don't know one single person who died of COVID. I honestly don't. So we knew we just wanted to get out of there.
Can I ask, how did the Japanese population react to this situation? Because, they have a lot of, especially at their academic institutions, there's a ton of back and forth between China and Japan. So it's been a long time since I've been back, but I'm just curious, how were they handling it?
Well, again, we were in Okinawa, so very tiny island with an extremely elderly population. And I would imagine that it would be as panicky, but I never got that vibe. I mean, even when we left, I just never got that vibe. But I mean, I honestly think the world could be coming to an end and Japanese people would still be in a straight line at the airport, or in a straight line to get the next plane that's a last plane. They're just so polite. So I don't even know that they have they're not like Americans. They wouldn't go rioting. They wouldn't go breaking into stores. They would share the last piece of bread with their neighbor. That's just the culture that they are. So if there was a panic, it was like an internal situation. I never got that, scared vibe from them.
So in the summer of 2020, you all left.
We did. Well, we started thinking about leaving. June, July, I told my husband, because to get a government job, it takes quite a bit. Sometimes it's faster if you could make a phone call, and have you wink your buddy, hook you up. Yeah, it's a lot faster. But I said we need to get out of here.
And you were wanting to leave because things were starting to shut down and become more fearful.
Yeah, well, it wasn't Japan was shutting down. This was not Japan. This was coming from our American government. They were the ones saying, if you are American stationed here, you are not allowed to go to restaurants. If you are an American stationed here, you cannot sit down at a restaurant. You can only get to-go food. The only way you can sit down at a restaurant is if you go on base to one of our restaurants, then you can sit down. Of course, you got to wear the mask from the front door to the booth, but then you can take it off and you're safe at the booth with the plastic around you.
So this came all from the American side. You didn't see any of this from the Japanese side.
Correct. The Japanese could go out and eat and do what they wanted to do and go places. So it was just coming from the American people. But again, Japanese, as polite as they are, they still weren't super keen, especially in Okinawa, with us being there. We had protests outside of base sometimes for, Americans go home or whatever like that. But they might have been just a little bit happy to not have us invading all their spaces as much as usual. But no, it was all coming from the base.
Well, it's
Okay.
love-hate because the economy there's a huge portion of the economy that depends on the U.S. patronage.
Huge, yes.
Yeah.
Especially in Okinawa. And we always said that, like, if we were to actually pull out of Okinawa and be completely gone, take all of our money with us and give them all their land back, it's very rural. It's very basic. A lot of them are farmers. They have plots of land on base where they go and farm and grow stuff, fishing industries and like that. But yeah, it would be a huge hit to their economy for sure in Japan, in Okinawa, 100%. Okay.
Your husband was brought into a job in Belgium, and you all requested to relocate.
Right. So he transferred. So he's civilian. So when he was in Okinawa, he's working for the Air Force. When he moved to Belgium or got the job offer in Belgium, it was for the Army. So we went over there. SHAPE is something headquarter allied. It's where NATO is. SHAPE is the base. SHAP. I don't know if there's any on there. I think there is. But it's basically NATO. It's where NATO's headquartered. So there's that base, and then there was another base, but it's called the Benelux. So that's what he went over there to do, and it's basically, Germany, Netherlands, Luxembourg. I think we had one base in Luxembourg that he was in charge of, and then a couple in Belgium. So the Benelux. So we went over there, and it just so happened they had a DODEA, Department of Defense Education, DSO, which is the district superintendent's office. So what that is that's where, the superintendent is. So if you think of like a school district in, your county, there's a superintendent, right? So this would be the superintendent for all of Europe is where I was working, and it was right there in Belgium. So that was the office that I was at. And so I knew the job that I did was very hard. They had very high turnover. It was not an easy job if you don't have a thick skin. And again, my history in customer service, like, you can yell at me all day long about your troubles. And at the end of the day, I'm like, well, I'm here to help you. So if you want to vent, like, I have to go home to my 3 kids. If it makes you feel better to yell at me, that's fine. I'm not the one that created, your debt or whatever it is that you're upset about, or your late paycheck. But so I knew that they had an opening because just of how hard the work is that I was doing. So I called I guess she was one of the supervisors over there. And I had worked with her previously in Japan very briefly because, like I said, at one point we were down to 2 people for like a 4 or 5 district area. So like I did South Japan, which was about 30 schools. Then there was like there was a lady in Korea who did those 30 schools. Then we had a lady who was in charge of Guam. So when you went over to Europe, I was in charge of like Netherlands and parts of Germany. And so I called her and I said, hey, do you remember helping me out whenever we were in Okinawa? We're moving to Belgium. I'd really like, I saw that there was an opening. And she said, yeah, there's an opening. We have to list it on USA Jobs. It's required by the law for us to list it for however many days. She said, but what we'll do is we'll just reject all the applicants, because what they can do is just say none of these people are qualified enough. None of them are good enough. And then it kind of starts the process over unless you can do a local hire. So she said, we'll just put it out there once, we'll drag it out as long as possible. Once the job closes and you get here, we'll just hire you as a local hire, which means I don't get like PCS service, which I didn't need because my husband gets all that. So I didn't need any extra benefits for, moving over there. So we got there in October of 2020. And I should have started right away, but there was some crosshairs with my email. And this is what really is a bummer for me, is because of my gap from when we moved there and when I actually started at Belgium, DODEA. When I was terminated, I was 20 days away from my 2-year probationary period being over, which would have given me it would have taken a whole lot of work to fire me after the 2-year probationary period. When you're in that 2 years, they can basically say, like, we don't like that you dyed your hair and, you're out. They kind of get rid of you for any reason within that time period. But I did end up starting at the DSO, the District Superintendent's Office in Belgium, in December. At that time, everybody was masking. It was required. And I kind of was like, this is dumb. And like, no, but you have to, unless you're at your cubicle. If you're at your cubicle, open air cubicle, then you can unmask. But if you're walking around, you go to the bathroom, from here to the bathroom, you got to put it on. I guess what I do in the bathroom is fine, and then come back out.
Holly, when you got over to Belgium, were you thinking, when you saw all of this masking, were you thinking, what did we get ourselves into? Why did we leave? Or was it still a better situation?
No. Yeah, because again, we love to travel, and the whole point of my existence is to give my kids everything I didn't have growing up, to give them an amazing life, to give them experiences. And then, like I said, we knew we wanted to get out of America. Before we had kids, and I was with my husband, we lived in Sicily and we traveled a lot. And I just thought, what an amazing thing to see, to see the Roman Colosseum, to see the Michelangelo, that's all things I wanted my kids to experience. So when we left Japan, when I knew that our Thailand trip had been canceled, because it was going to be like 16 days, we were hitting all the cities in as many as we could, and it was just going to be amazing. When that got canceled, I was just really defeated. And so when we moved to Belgium, I said, you know what? They're not going to stop me from driving to Germany. If I have to wear a mask and go see some castles in Germany, that's fine. The kids will get over it. Or if we have to go, we can go see the Anne Frank house where Anne Frank lived. We have to wear a mask. We have to social distance, or go in, at a certain time, because they only allow 50 people in, because they weren't completely shut down. So you could still do stuff. So at least, we were still having that experience. So for me to have to mask at work, it didn't affect my kids as much. So it didn't, bother me so much. When they did start masking the kids at school, I had a really hard time. I went back and forth with the principal, got in several fights with them about my kids masking at school, because I cut out, so they had the fabric masks or whatever, but I cut out the inside, the little, those 2 layers. So I would cut out the inside so my poor little baby could breathe. And they would say, well, now you've altered it. It's inefficient. It's ineffective. So then at another point, I ordered these masks, and these are the ones I would wear, but they were literally made of mesh. You could stick a pencil through it, right? You could literally stick it. That's how many holes. And I wore that at the office, and they never said anything. They never were like, that mask isn't good enough. I mean, clearly it wasn't. It was stupid that I was even wearing it, because it was full of holes. But they were just like, well, she's got the mask on. I guess that's all they wanted me to do. So for me, even having to wear that stupid thing, it didn't bother me, because I'm like, well. And then I remember there was a time I went to the kids' school, and I walked in, I had my camera on, and I went to the office. None of the office people had masks on. And I said, you're making these poor little, and I went with the principal, I said, you're making these poor children wear a mask for 6-7 hours a day. And my youngest at the time was in kindergarten, and she would come home and her mask was covered in food and spit. And then she would start to chew on it. And they're like, well, you should send her with more than one. That was their response. And I'm like, well, why is your whole office staff? Oh, well, they should have been, And so I think anytime they saw me coming after that, because I had my camera, they would put their masks on, or before they buzz me in the building, they'd all. But I know that I asked the kids, they said, your teachers wear masks? No, they sit at their desks. They don't wear their masks. So that did bother me, but that only went through the end of that year, and then they got rid of it. So we were kind of on the tail end of COVID at that point, that following year, when their mask mandates ended.
So just talking about masking, even people who knew that they did not work did not put up a fight about masking. Why did you?
Because I just thought it was, one, I thought it was dumb. 2, I thought there's no way on earth that this thing is stopping anything. I have an uncle who's a paramedic, and he was like, doctors who are in the ER, if you're a doctor, you take a full semester course on PPE protection, right? Personal protection. So you learn how to wear a mask properly. You learn how it's fitted. You learn that after 30 minutes to an hour, you need to change out that mask, because it's not going to be as effective. So just talking to him, and I was like, yeah. And I mean, I just feel like common sense went out the window with this whole pandemic. But I'm like, okay, a piece of fabric, and we know the size of COVID, right? So we know that it can go through this fabric. If you set it on your chair, people just have them hanging from their rearview mirrors in their car, and then they're grabbing one real quick to go in the grocery store, and then they put it back. I just thought, there's no way this is doing a darn thing. It looks stupid. I can't breathe in it. I was diagnosed with asthma years ago, and I don't really mess with my asthma too much. It's not bad, but I'm like, if you have asthma, to cover your mouth to make it harder to get oxygen into your body, this is silly. And I was a strong believer in people need to see people's faces. You need to be able to understand which is why we invented emojis, right? Because if you send a message and you don't have that extra little thing to say, hey, this is a joke, or, that's what you get when you have interpersonal communication with somebody. If I'm smiling, if I'm my eyebrow, whatever it is. And so I just thought, I'm not going to go along with this. I don't care if you guys are fine with it. I'm not okay with it. I just didn't feel comfortable with it.
I think some of us just have a harder time dealing with stupid. Period.
100%. 100%. And even if you present them with the facts of that's not doing anything, and then you would get, well, if it saves one person, and it's like, okay, where's the proof that it's saving one person? I don't understand. What person are you trying to save? Do you really think 6 feet makes a difference? Do you think, use your brain? If you step back, 1 foot to that person, do you really think you're in the contaminant zone? Where's the data? Where's the information that is proving all this? But a lot of times I didn't even engage because you just can't reason with these kinds of people. You just can't. So like I said, I bought my mesh mask and they never said anything to me. So I was good with that. I was like, you know what? If you're okay with me having this thing that is,
and I have
nothing.
Asked, was it very clear that it was mesh?
I was gonna say, I think I could still have it, but yeah, you could see my teeth. I mean, like I told you, you could stick a pencil through it. You could get a pencil and the hole would, so yeah, it was.
I have mine in my purse. I still keep it there.
I don't keep it. I'm traumatized by it. I threw a bunch of them away, but I kept those, and I'm like, just in case, God forbid, I would rather have these. But I sent the kids to school with those, and they wouldn't let the kids wear them at school. No, those aren't significant, effective enough. And I'm like, whatever. They would let me come in and pick the kids up in the mask, but my kids couldn't wear them to school. So when we got there, when I started in December of 2020. There are my dates here. Yeah. So when I started in December 2020, from December, and then we went into 2021 until July. I think everybody had to mask, but starting July, only the unvaxxed had to mask. And I don't know what line they drew at that point. So July 2020 was when I was the only one forced to mask. And what's ironic about even up until from January till July, even that entire time, if we all went to lunch together and we were outside of the building, it wasn't a big deal. If someone has a birthday party at a bar, we can all take our masks off and socialize with each other at somebody's house, play a poker game. It was completely fine. Let me ask
about the Belgium rules. Were there any rules, policies in Belgium?
They were pretty strict. The Germans were really strict. It was very hard to go anywhere over there without a mask. But really, there wasn't. Supposedly, you were supposed to have a negative test on you at all times if you're crossing a border in case you get pulled over. And you had to wear masks in grocery stores. At one point, it was really bad. Right when we got there, again, we kind of got lucky because we did 6 months in Okinawa without anything. And then by the time we got to Belgium, stuff was kind of winding down. Right when we got to Belgium was probably the tail end of the worst of it. And then it kind of just faded out until the vaccine mandate came out, at the end of COVID. But so there was a point where you would have to wait outside because they would only allow so many people in the grocery store. But from what I remember, it eased pretty fast. The restaurants never closed down while we were there anyway. The restaurants were never closed. IKEA was never closed. None of the boutiques or anything like that were ever fully shut down. So again, I felt like we kind of just skirted the top of the wave of this COVID madness, avoiding it the best we could. The hardest thing was the schools with the kids. I mean, I can handle it. I'm an adult. So for me, it is stupid, but it's not affecting my growth. It's not affecting my brain.
The unvaxxed were asked to mask from January to June.
Yeah.
By June, they started to take those off.
So I think we had our first set of vaccines available at that point, right? So if you had gotten a shot or 2 shots, you were considered vaxxed and you didn't have to wear it anymore. I will say another thing that was interesting about, again, DODEA, Department of Defense Education, is if you got the vaccine, the first vaccine, they gave you 2 days off afterwards to recover because you were so sick. So they gave you 2 paid days off after that first shot. And then when maybe it was after the first and the second shot. I think it was after the first and the second shot. And then after the booster came out, it was 1 day off. So yeah, it was 2 days off for the first 2.
Let me just add on that. I was doing time and attendance for a fairly large office, and I had never seen so much time taken off for recovery from an immunization. Never seen anything like that. I've done time and attendance before, and I was looking around going, are you guys, I mean, you got to be aware that this is not normal. People should not be having
and you would
days
hear them
on end.
say, you would hear them say, like, I felt like I was going to die. I felt like it was horrible. I was, they would literally say, I thought I was going to die. It was so bad. I'm like, that's not normal. Like, even when you get the flu, they're like, oh, you're not going to run a fever. You might feel a little woozy, but you'll be completely fine. And then to go back for the second shot, if that did that to me the first shot, the doctor office would never see me again. Like, I'd be calling a lawyer and saying, like, I had an adverse side effect. Why isn't this warned? Why isn't there an FDA warning on this? Like, what is going on?
There's no updated warning, though, because, the shots that were passed out, they had literally, we checked in my office, blank sheets. I don't know what it was like for DODEA, but
I don't know, because I didn't get it or talk to so I didn't look at anything like that, because I was like, well, this isn't going to happen. I'm not getting any vaccine. And I made it very clear. I told my bosses, and they kind of tried to push it in an off way of like, well, you get 2 days off. And I'm like, okay, I don't need 2 days off. Like, it's not worth it. And so I was very clear on any of our meetings, because they did ask a couple times, were you going to get it? And I said, no. And actually in my EEO filing, when they interviewed my boss, one of the things she said was, Holly refused to get the shot. And then she said, well, I didn't fire her for that. I mean, like, it's just, everything I have is so documented. It's completely bizarre to me. But it was heavily pushed. And I think after a while, and you guys might have noticed this too, I think after a while, people started feeling guilty for getting the vaccine. And so then they really tried to push it for the people who did it, because, like, misery loves company type situation. Because I think there was a lot of people who had regret afterwards. And then those people seem to be the ones that pushed it the hardest. Like, well, you should really get it. It wasn't that bad. And, at least, and I
didn't die.
Yeah, I didn't die. My heart's at risk now and have palpitations and, one arm left. But yeah. So that was the other thing too, is the amount of people who said, like, their arm was going to fall off, like how sore that their arm felt from the injection site.
So what did you see in September of 2021 when the mandates came down?
I'll start. So September, I'll tell you some interesting stuff, and then I'll get to what happened after Biden decided that. So I think the vaccine mandate came out on the 29th. That's the date that I have. Does that sound right to you guys?
9 September 2021.
The 9th of September. Okay, so we had it on the 9th.
Slid into my brain.
Okay. It might have been right before that or right after that. So my boss was actually in Germany. So I was the only person in my office that was a part of this big group that was in Germany. That's where all the other CSR, customer service representatives, work. That was technically my title, was a CSR. My SF50, which is basically your hiring document for the government, said I was a financial analyst, but my role was CSR, customer service representative. So all the other ones were in Germany with my boss and with the big boss. And we were supposed to go over there for a luncheon. It was about a 3-hour drive. There was another guy in my office from that group, but he was not in my chain of command. He was a different kind of financial person. So he was in my office. We were not in the same chain of command. We did have the same boss. So he said, we are invited to this luncheon. And my boss wanted to meet me. She'd never met me before because I was in Belgium. She did hire me, but she had never met me before other than like Teams calls. And so he said, we need to go to this luncheon over in Germany. It's 3 hours. I'm going to pick you up at 6 a.m. We'll drive together and we'll go over there. We'll have lunch, potluck or whatever it is that they're doing. And then we'll drive back to Belgium. I said, okay. So I get on the phone with my boss and I said, hey, do I need to have a COVID test to cross the border? I'm going for a work function. I'm basically going from one American base to another American base because there were rules, like they were changing all the time. So I was wondering, because sometimes you could go from one base to the other base and it was considered like you're still in America in both places if you don't stop. So I said, do I need to have a COVID test? And she said, yeah, you should probably get one in case you guys get pulled over, and you crossed a border. I said, okay, is the government going to pay for that? I'm going for a work function. You're insisting that I get this test. Are you guys going to pay for it? She said, no, you need to pay for it yourself. I said, okay, cool. Can I take 30 minutes off at the end of the day to go get this done? I'm going to have to go buy the test. I'm going to have to get it tested. And she said, no, you can't. You need to do this all on your own. So I'm like, okay. So I went and bought the test and I spit on it or something. It actually came back positive. And I was like, I threw it out the window. I was like, all right, I'm going to Germany. Who cares? So I'm just like, this is ridiculous. And she never asked for it. So the next morning we went to Germany pick me up. Nobody asked me for it. Don't have to wear a mask in the car. It's close quarters, right? I'm having to, if I'm at the work with this guy who has his own office, I got to wear a mask. But in the car with him, traveling for 3 hours, totally fine. We go to the luncheon. Nobody has a mask on at this point. I think I was supposed to have a mask on because it was September, so it should have been only unvaccinated people have a mask on. Nobody said anything. I did not wear a mask. I met with my boss in her office, and she said I was doing a great job. She was so happy that I came from Okinawa. She was, happy to have me on her team. That month, I had received a cash bonus for my work. They do quarterly reviews or however often they do the reviews. I got my bonus right before I met with her. Everything was great. What a great job I was doing. Thank you for picking up extra work. We had a ticketing system where teachers could enter tickets, like, I have a question, I have this issue. And when I started there, they were over 400 tickets. I got them down to less than 10, and we kind of maintained under 20 just from me answering these tickets constantly to get them caught up. So I wasn't a slacker. And the fact that at the end of the time they said I was a bad worker just really bothered me. It bothers me to my core because I knew that I wasn't. I was a hard worker. And in that meeting, she said so. And so everything was fine. That was, again, in September. Go back to Belgium.
Can I ask real quick? You got this really positive review, face-to-face review. You're not a slacker. No one likes being called a slacker. But, right. Did any of that change? Maybe you're getting to that. Did any of that change over time? Was there
It didn't. And I will touch on that as we go on to what happened at the end of my story. But so we go back to Belgium, and then the mandate comes out. And, I think we had all kind of heard rumors that might happen. I didn't think it was legal. I was like, there's no way the government is going to do that. It's 100% illegal. No. Sure enough, the mandate comes out. And the first thing I do when I hear it is, I'm reaching out to my boss. Like, what do we do? Do I need to file a religious exemption? Can I get the paperwork? And she said, well, just hold on. We don't know, really what's happening yet. This is all new. We need to figure it out. And I'm like, okay. Week goes by. I'm like, hey, can I get a religious exemption? I would like to go ahead and have one on file. Like, I don't care what happens. I don't care if they revoke it. I don't care. Like, give me the paperwork. I know this routine. Give me the paperwork. They would not give it to me. There wasn't anywhere to find it online. I mean, I could find a generic one and kind of fill it out, but I know she wouldn't have accepted it. She would have just said, hold tight. She kept saying, we don't have information from headquarters. So headquarters is in Virginia, Peachtree, Virginia. And she just kept saying, hold on, we don't know. Hold on, we don't know. So then a little bit of time goes by. I want to say maybe the October timeframe. We have a huge Teams meeting, and it's got headquarters on it. Like, top of the top, DODEA president lady, I forget her name, but she's on the meeting, and she's going off about, okay, it is mandated. You guys are all expected to have this shot, to maintain a mission-ready workforce, and we need to be prepared, and this is for the good of, mankind, or whatever nonsense she was spewing. And at the end of that meeting, she said, "Are there any questions?" And I raised my hand. I said, "Hey, what about religious exemptions?" And she goes, "We're not doing those." And then she kind of stopped, and she said, "Well, they're not going to approve them." And then she stopped, and she goes, "Well, you can file them, and we'll just see what happens." And I kind of was taken aback, like, how do you know they're not going to approve them? What do you mean approve? Like, approve what? You don't get to approve or disprove my religious accommodation.
Is that documented in your EEO?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I actually have text messages. I have text messages because as soon as I hung up with that, I messaged my friend and I said, how can she say no before we've even filed it? How can she say no when she hasn't even given us the paperwork? And so I have that in text message where I've said, she literally just said, on this Teams meeting, which I'm guessing, I think they're all probably archived somewhere. And I would imagine a Freedom of Information Act might be able to get me that exact phone call. But, I have the text message where I said, I cannot believe she just told me no on this phone call when we don't even know what's going on. And so then shortly after that, they did say, shortly after that, they did say, okay, so we're going to let you guys have religious exemptions. You have 1 week to fill them out. Again, I didn't know you had a timeline on filing a religious accommodation. I thought you kind of could no, they gave us a week. They gave us specific religious accommodation paperwork. They said you have 1 week to file this paperwork.
And was that paperwork different than previous religious accommodations?
I believe it was. That's because it was asked. Yeah, I believe it was, because it was asking specifically about the vaccine. Have you had any other
You see,
objections?
it's a
Yeah.
it's a Religious Freedom Reformation Act violation to change the procedures in a religious accommodation. So if there was somebody who said, "Hey, listen, I'd like to wear a hijab to work," and
Yes,
for
exactly.
security reasons, yeah, they can't change it.
Right. Or if you say, I need to have 10 minutes a day to pray, when the call of prayer goes off, I need to, put a mat out and pray. No, it had to have been different, because it said, like, what is your religion? Have you refused any other vaccines based on your religion? And it was all about vaccine stuff. It was, have you ever refused a vaccine before? Have you, when did you decide that you were religious against vaccines? And it was very, very vaccine oriented.
This is very important. I'm glad we're speaking to you today, and I'm sure we'll have another one on EEO procedures in the future. But what I'm hearing from you about the vaccine piece, it's especially important. There have been hundreds at this point of EEO complaints that have been tossed out. They've been tossed out and said failure to state a claim, and the justification they put on there is vaccination status is not a protected status. Well, the people who were making the complaints were saying, no, it violates religious freedom. And on the other side of it, what I'm hearing from you is the people who were arguing with you about your ability to put forward a religious accommodation were justifying that through vaccine mandates, which would indicate that they are not taking they're just assuming the worst of everyone who is filing these religious accommodations. It's an egregious violation. It
was completely, unexpected for me, to say the least. I mean, like I said, I thought I was going to file a paper and just get back to work. I will say I was probably a little bit arrogant, because I did think I was an awesome employee, and I really in my head kind of thought they can't afford to lose me. Like their turnover is so high. They really can't afford to lose me. I'm such a good worker. I do so much. I do extra work. I work on the weekends. I give people my personal cell phones. I've given teachers my cell phones, saying, like, hey, I'm so sorry. Like, if you have this issue and if it's not fixed by this date, call me. I will get on my computer. I take my laptop home every night in case, it takes me 2 seconds to get on there and like check something for somebody, or correct their time card at the last minute before it goes through payroll, so that they actually get paid a day that maybe they had tried to take off and then decided to work. Like, I really kind of in my head thought, okay, I'm going to file this paper. They're going to approve it. They like me a lot. I have no reason to think that, that they didn't like me, or that they would be willing to just, but I will say my big boss, she was incredibly an arrogant, rude, horrible person. And I always told my other coworkers, like, I'm so glad I don't work in Germany. I'm so glad I don't work with that lady, because she terminated one employee for moving her desk at one point. Like, before I got there, the employee had been there for 3 months. And she said she went on vacation. When the girl came back, she'd moved her desk, and she said, that's unacceptable. You didn't ask me. And I guess the girl's like, it's a desk. What's a big deal? And then this is all hearsay. I don't know if there was other issues, but I know that she'd only been there for 3 months, and then that happened, and got text messages with her as well of with the way things went with that one lady. And even when we had her deposed for my EEO, she was completely combative with my lawyer, and just a mean, horrible lady. Like, she was just a sad woman, who has too much power.
So when did you file that EEO?
So let's see. Let me look at my timeline here, because I just want to make sure I get it right. So immediately after they came out with the mandate, I started asking for my religious exemptions. Was constantly told, hold on. Finally, we got the religious exemptions like the first week of November, and they were due on the 11th. So I turned mine in on the 11th. I turned it in on the 11th. And then a little bit of time went by, and they said, okay, we still don't know how, if we're going to approve to this day, up until, from everyone I talked to, anyone I know who followed, they never approved one single religious accommodation.
That's an important point too, and I don't mean to interrupt too much, because
no.
But the failure to accommodate is another religious violation. You can't just simply let it lie until, like, the excuses we're hearing is, well, we're waiting to hear how things turn out in the Fifth Circuit, or with a number of other lawsuits that are going on. But that isn't how the religious accommodation works.
Right.
A lawsuit doesn't change your religious beliefs.
Correct. So finally, I filed my religious exemption, waited, and they said, well, in the meantime, here's what we're going to do. Of course, I had to continue to mask because I was unvaccinated. They said, what we're also going to do is start having you test, COVID test every single Monday to come into the building. And that was supposed to go for the unvaccinated and any outside person coming into the building. So like if we had a water delivery or somebody bringing supplies from another building, they were supposed to either have a negative COVID test or do one on site, which of course never happened. Like never happened, did not happen. This was supposed to start November, at the end of November, but they didn't get the tests in time. And I kept asking them, I want to see exactly what test you're using. I want to do research. And when they finally did give it to me, I sent a long document of every chemical they had in those tests. I said, I'm not putting this in my body. This is not happening. And so in December...
Could you specify what you found in the ingredient list?
I would have to look, but none of it was OSHA. Like I filed a complaint with OSHA and I was like, okay, these are chemicals that you don't even recommend by like point per parcel or however they measured it out. I forget what the verbiage is. But you don't even recommend that to be safe in like a big chemical plant. Like that shouldn't even be an exposed chemical. And, you know, here's all the side effects. And you're wanting me to put 3 of these chemicals in my body at one time, every single Monday. For what? And then that was the other thing too. I said, how long am I doing this for? For the time? Like, is that a condition of employment? Like, I don't understand what the point of this is. And of course, the buck was always passed somebody else. Well, that's the chain of command. That it's not up to me. It's up to somebody else. That's coming from higher up, you know, whatever. And so
can I ask on that point about not knowing where things were coming from, and not knowing how DODEA works, was it like military where you have like orders with like fragos and warning orders and op orders, or is it more like a normal civilian type?
It's got to be different because I've never heard of any of those things.
Okay,
so
good.
like I had my boss, kind of like my supervisor, and then her boss, which was the mean lady I was telling you about, and then her direct boss was that top of the head DODEA lady who said that they're not going to approve any accommodations. And the same level, I don't know if you're familiar or if you've heard of Tom Brady, not the football player, but Tom Brady is the head of DODEA. Like he is top of the top. He's right up there with Biden. He's a geriatric man who's been in office forever. He's been in the bureaucracy forever. He will not retire. I think he's close to 80 now at this point. But her boss's boss, that top lady that said they were going to put, she's like right up there with him. So it was that was kind of my main line. I don't know if there were other people involved. I know there was like lawyers, labor management relation, LMER is what they called it, labor management relations for employees. There were different side things that they accessed if they had, you know, legal questions or budget questions, that kind of thing. But as far as my direct chain of command, it really was kind of only those 4 people. And then the president, I'm assuming, is like at the top of that.
Gotcha.
But yeah, they just kept saying, we don't, they used the, you know, the royal we don't know. They haven't said, we don't know. So they finally told me you're going to start testing on December 3rd, or let me see. Yeah, that's right. December 3rd. You're going to test. And so on December 1st, which was a Friday, December 3rd was a Monday. Friday, I filed my EEO complaint, my filing of like, I'm the only one having to do this. I have a religious exemption. I'm being discriminated against. And I also put for GINA, which a lot of people, you know, the genetic information in your body. I said, they're discriminating on me because I don't have this genetic makeup that they want me to have. You know, once you put that mRNA vaccine in your body, it changes your makeup of your DNA, basically. I said, so they're discriminating on that fact of like, if you were to take my blood, it doesn't have that COVID antibody in it or whatever it is that God only knows what you're putting in your body. But so I filed for that. I filed for religious discrimination as well.
One more interruption here. That GINA complaint, it is starting. There's research coming out that is starting to substantiate the GINA complaints that were put forward previously. Many of those, from my perspective, what I'm seeing across Feds for Freedom, many of the GINA complaints have been well, you know, tossed out. However,
mine was, but I still was like, you know what? No.
Put a pin in it. Put a pin in it, because the research that's coming out is clearly indicating that it can cross the membrane of the nucleus and integrate with DNA. And that is one of the key factors that would support a GINA claim.
Okay,
so,
good
sorry.
To know.
Sorry
no. I mean, I looked at everything because I just want to be thorough. And I'm like, and again, I was so upset. I was just very upset that this was even happening. How could this happen? We've moved twice, and the kids are resilient, but we've just gotten settled here in Belgium. I truly don't want to have to pick up and leave. I also don't want to lose my job because, it was a really great job. Here's the other thing too, is I was such a terrible worker, right? Like I was a really bad worker. When they hired me, I told them, look, I have 3 kids. They all go to school. I cannot come into work until I drop my kids off, which was about maybe 10 minutes from my office. The DODEA, the government school that, for the American school was about 10 minutes from my office. I said, I cannot come into work until I drop the kids off, and I need to be there to pick them up. If not, I can't take this job. And they said, do not worry about it. Come in when you drop them off, work, pick them up, take your laptop home, and work from home. And this was the arrangement when I started. So the entire time that I was working, I got off every day at 2 o'clock, went and picked the kids up, and worked till 5:30 from the house. When all this happened and I did my religious accommodation, I requested to work from home, and they're like, we're not approving telework right now. And I'm like, I've literally been teleworking every single day since I worked here. And then all of a sudden, that's not an option. I could still do my 3 hours a day, but if I do the extra 5 at home, like apparently that wasn't allowed. But I digress. Sorry. So let me get back to that. So
no, you don't digress. I mean, that's an important point too.
Yeah.
I mean, that clearly indicated this was not a health measure. Like, if you're a dangerous bag of viruses, right? Yeah. Shouldn't you be out of the office? Wouldn't it make sense for you to be home? Right.
I could understand maybe in Okinawa because we had a lot of teachers on the base that could come talk to me. In Belgium, no. Everything was headquartered in Germany. I was the only person in Belgium, really. There would be no reason for me to be in the office. Nobody in that office had anything to do with me. I was completely a separate entity from them. It wouldn't have made a difference if I was there or not. It's not like I needed to be there for meetings. There was no reason for me to be there. Everything I did, I could do from home. And I had been doing from home. So that was just completely frustrating again. But it is what it is. So on December 1st, I filed my EEOC complaint. I was supposed to test on the 3rd, which was, let me see. On the 3rd, I'm sorry. I filed on the 1st. The 3rd was a Friday. And I was emailing like crazy, asking my boss, like, I'm not coming in. I mean, I'm not going to test. And she said, if you do not test, you cannot come in the building. You will be considered AWOL at that point. And I said, can I see the documentation that shows like where this is a punishment? Because on my religious exemption request and I did a medical exemption request as well. And I did the EEOC, but I was told no retaliation can take place against me until something is decided upon on these matters. And I showed her all the documentation. I showed her from LMER, which is the lawyer side of DODEA, because I reached out to the labor management relations, whoever they are. I reached out to them and they said, no, they can't do anything. You've got all these pending actions. It's fine. And so I sent these emails and like a bunch on Friday, and they went unanswered because I said, can I take leave? I don't want to like until this is figured out. I'll take leave. I will take leave without pay. I don't want to lose my job. I'll take leave without pay. I'll take sick leave. I had enough banked up, and emails went unanswered all of Friday. Never heard anything. So Monday I didn't go to work. I stayed home. They were going to let me in the building, and I didn't want to be embarrassed and humiliated by showing up and having security forces take me out, maybe take my CAT card, my ID card. Like I didn't know what was going to happen. I wasn't going to risk that. So I stayed home. That afternoon, I got a phone call from the guy that I had driven to Germany with. And him and I were friends. We hung out. We had lunch at least once a week. I went to his, the engagement party. I went to his engagement party, got him a gift. We played poker at my house. Like I knew this guy. He said, hey, can you meet me tomorrow morning outside of base in this abandoned parking lot that's kind of by base? It was like an old mattress. It was just an abandoned building. He said, hey, can you meet me there in the morning? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll meet you. I kind of thought, I know this guy. He's a good guy. I wasn't worried about it, basically. I just thought he's probably going to just maybe extend his condolences and say, this really sucks. I'm so sorry this is happening to you. Like, honestly, that's what I thought was going to happen. So I went on Tuesday morning to this parking lot, and I'm like sitting there, and I'm like, I'm here. And I look over, and I see him and the lady who's like secretary to I don't know what her official title is, chief officer or something or another. Again, I told you nobody in that building is in my chain of command. I see him and her walk into my car. They've got a box. They've got a file folder. And I roll down my window and they say, we're here on behalf of your boss terminating you for being AWOL yesterday. And they hand me paperwork through my window, and I kind of had expected something was going to happen, so I'd already kind of cleared out my drawer of anything that I wanted. I didn't take my laptop home on Friday just because I didn't want to have government property and then be considered AWOL with government. Like, I was scared, so I was like, I'm not taking any chances. So I was like, I left my computer because if they put me on AWOL with government property, I want to get arrested. I just didn't know. So at that point, they put this file in there and they say, do you want this stuff? I'm like, I don't need it. They said, we need your key fob and your military ID. And I said, I was like, I have my key fob, but you're not getting my military ID. Like, no, I can't get on base without it. I can't get to the commissary. I can't do any food shopping. Like, you're not taking that. So that was that. They gave me this letter, and it basically said, you didn't show up for work yesterday. You're considered AWOL, and you're being terminated. So that sucked. I was kind of upset about that. So I went home and
sorry, can I ask, did you have any other contact with that fellow after that?
I did not. No.
I
blocked him. He should be ashamed. Yeah.
He should be ashamed of himself. I hope every night he goes to sleep curled up in a ball, wondering whether or not he should have done that. Not to be vindictive.
No, I don't think he does, though. Like, honestly, looking back on it, he was a very materialistic person, and I remember having conversations with him. He was just now getting married. He didn't have any kids, and all he talked about was buying like fancy purses for his wife and going shopping. And I said, well, none of that means anything. Like, why do you spend, $2,000 on a purse for your wife? Like, don't you want to put that aside, for your future? And so I just think he wasn't in the mindset. He was quite a bit younger than me. So I think he was just a different generation to where, and also I think he was following orders. Maybe he didn't want to get fired. Maybe, my boss called him and said, you need to get Holly to this parking lot because she can't come in the building. She can't come on base. I don't know.
Shouldn't be ashamed.
Yeah, you're 100% right. But,
I used to be a lot more forgiving of things, but as time has gone on, nah, you know what?
Yeah,
I'm not. And
I get it. And it's hard. It's hard to forgive. We go to church every Sunday though. And actually it's funny that you said that last Sunday, the whole thing was about forgiveness. And, I think it's just better for your soul. I can't hold on to some of this stuff. It's not worth it. I can't let it. I've got so much wonderfulness in my life, and I'm doing what I can to hold DODEA responsible for these actions and the government responsible. And just to add, whatever he's got going on, and I feel like, if that's his attitude, it's going to come back and bite him at some point in his life. It might happen to him. I don't control, his consequences for those actions. So I haven't even actually thought about it. It's been a while since I've had him in my mind.
Well said, Holly.
No. Yeah, so that is what it is. So that Monday, after I got terminated, threw a piece of paper through my window in an abandoned parking lot that I was lured to, I get an email in my personal email from the mean boss lady that I was telling you about, and it simply said, "We've rescinded your termination. We expect you to show up to work tomorrow for testing. If you refuse to test, you are allowed to take sick leave, annual leave, or leave without pay." And I wrote back. I said, I will not be testing. I would like to use my sick leave. And I sent her a schedule for the next 2 weeks. And it was like a mix of sick leave and annual leave, just kind of mixing it up. 1 day without pay here because I didn't have, enough to like fully cover 2 or 3 weeks worth of work. I said, well, I'll take 2 days without pay here, 2 days without pay there. Let me know if this is acceptable. And I worked from home. I took leave. I'm sorry. I took leave Tuesday and Wednesday, and then no, I'm sorry. I was terminated on Tuesday. I took leave Wednesday and Thursday. On Friday, I get an email in the morning from my boss, just like a PDF saying I've been fired again for poor performance within my probationary period. And that was that.
So within how many days were you fired, rehired, and fired again?
So I was terminated I was AWOL on Monday, terminated on Tuesday, rehired on Tuesday, and then re-terminated on a Friday for poor performance. And whenever the EEO lady talked to my boss, and we had all this documentation of like, she's a good worker, she's got performance bonuses, whatever. Her statement was, well, after that meeting where she praised me in person, my performance took a sharp turn down, a deep dive, fire bleed dive of performance from September, whenever that meeting was, until October, November, December 1st. So in 60 days.
See, and that's how I've seen this has happened multiple times with a bunch of members of Feds for Freedom, you know, what happens is they're not going to try and get you on, you know, your religious. I mean, they're going to get in a lot of trouble if they retaliate for your deeply held religious beliefs. So they try and make it a matter of the quality of your work, or,
Right.
you know, in my case, they said I failed to lead, and you know, there's a whole bunch of these. There's a ton of these examples. So it doesn't make it any better, but you're in good company.
Well, yeah, it's not great, but it's not bad either. It's not all bad. My EEOC went through. They did throw out the GINA part of it, but I guess they found enough evidence for me to move on, and I've been jumping the hoops of that for the last 2 years. I think I'm a lot further than anybody else in the DODEA group with Brooke. I believe you're speaking to her soon. I was kind of one of the first people to go with all this madness happening. I was one of the first people to get terminated. A lot of the teachers held on, tried to, you know, they either got tested, they tried to just make it through the school year. So I'm a lot further in my case. We've actually are waiting on a summary judgment right now. And from what I understand, they have only 90 days, 180 days afterwards to respond, but I guess they're backlogged. So at this point, we can go to federal court, but I'm like, this is just taking an insane amount of time. So I'm just in a holding pattern right now.
I was going to say, we are going to be having a discussion on these EEO processes, and you are right about how it's been working and how long it takes, and that's by design. That's by design. It's meant to be an administrative procedure that takes a very long time, and it's a war of attrition. And when, you know, the EEOC in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that setup or that infrastructure. And it's intended for the ones and twosies that appear here and there throughout every once in a while, you're going to have a case of religious violations. Every once in a while, you're going to have a case of, you know, sexual harassment or whatever it is. This system was not designed, and I'm not giving them a pass, for a vax mandate that covered the entire federal workforce. Because what's going to happen? You've got thousands and orders of magnitude more complaints that are having to be processed by, frankly, a group of people who are bureaucrats. They're appointed to go in there and manage administrative procedure. So good on you for forcing it as quickly as possible and just, you know, nose to the grindstone. It's been
a roller coaster. Yeah. And I did it all on my own. And it is so tedious. I know a lot of people who went through it and kind of gave up, or they got rejected and they didn't do the appeal, just because it is painstakingly hard, especially if you can't afford a lawyer. And you know, I didn't get a lawyer till close to the very end, whenever I was actually like going to have to deal with DODEA's lawyer. I was like, I don't know any of this jargon. They were asking me for stuff, and I said, okay, this is out of the realm. But up until that point, you know, I think I basically have an associate's degree in law at this point, because I had done so much research. You know, I knew how to do the template on anything I was submitting to the court, just because I didn't want to screw it. I didn't want to be dismissed because I missed a comma on something, or because I didn't file correctly. And it's been really hard. But, you know, hopefully, again, I'm not going to let DODEA off the hook. It's not fair what they did. If I could hold Joe Biden accountable, I would definitely do that. But the fact that, you know, they had these policies in place, a religious exemption should not have been a big deal. This should have been, I mean, they could have avoided this very easily. And I was one person out of 2 countries that had even asked for it. Like, give me this one person, and everything is fine. And even the teachers, that, from what I understand, it's really like, if you're looking at the whole population. So I feel like there was something else going on, to where, one, I think it was vindictiveness on my boss's part, because she was just a vindictive, power-hungry, crazy lady. But 2, I think that there might have been something else going on, like for especially government employees who didn't fall in line. Something had to have gone out saying zero tolerance for non-compliance. And that, I mean, that's just speculation on my part from what I saw. So, yeah.
Not totally. Here's what we're also seeing, and Stephanie, I jumped in again, but, you know, the Biden administration brought EEOC in early to the Safe Federal Workforce Task Force, coordinated with them early, which in theory that's a wise thing to do. If you're going to institute a nationwide mandate, federal government-wide mandate, you want to make sure your legal P's and Q's are all lined up right and I's dotted, T's crossed. However,
that didn't seem very Biden-y, just in my opinion. But go ahead.
No.
there were no I's and T's crossed in the pullout of Afghanistan. This kind of feels just as haphazard as some of his other decisions. But go ahead.
Well, and I think you're catching my drift here. This was less about making sure that you were making sure that you weren't crossing a legal line, and more ensure that you had set up a mechanism to make sure that the dictates were flowing downhill. They were making their way down, because we're seeing language in the EEO responses that look like cut and paste, and they're not from the same facility or the same base or the same agency or department. It's very similar verbiage across the entirety of the United States and all the agencies and departments. That's not a mistake. What that is it's an administration that decided that they were going to do something, and they were going to tell EEOC how they were going to handle it. Anyhow, yeah. Stephanie, off to you. You were going to say something earlier and I cut you off.
So after you were fired, what happened?
It was really hard for a little while. I was making a good chunk of change there. My husband was making even better money than I was. He was a lot higher than I was. And when you live overseas as a civilian, they pay you a rent. So our rent was not, we weren't paying our rent. The government was paying our rent. They also pay your utility bills. So our rent and our utility bills were paid for. However, when we moved there, again, we want our kids to have the best. And unfortunately, we did rent a house that was a little bit outside of our budget, which was fine at the time because we were making more than enough money to cover it. We were paying about $1,500 out of pocket to live in this beautiful neighborhood and, do stuff with our kids, lessons and stuff like that for them to have. And then once I lost my job, we just couldn't afford it anymore. It's very expensive to live in Europe, and it's very expensive to shop in Europe, even for groceries. And we just weren't making ends meet any longer. I had a car payment. My husband had a car payment. We were, overextended on our house just because when we got there, we thought it was going to be fine. We both had jobs. And the other thing that kind of pushed us out, I guess we could have made it work. I don't want to live on credit cards, but my husband being a civilian, I was not going to let him get the vaccine. I wasn't. I said, you're not getting it. The answer is no. And we had a few fights about it. He wanted to get it. He was like, I was in the Navy. Do you know that they used to line us up and just literally jab us in a line? You know how many vaccines I've gotten. It's not a big deal. Just let me get it. And I said, no. And it's not, I don't wear the pants. It's not like that at all. I sat down and we had a very serious conversation. I said, something is not right. I can feel it in my gut. I feel it in my heart. You're not getting this vaccine. And this is the other thing that's kind of messed up. And my husband's very hesitant on me even talking about this because he is still employed by the government. He's like, if I get fired over this, he's going to be real mad at me. But his chain of command, said, you have to get vaccinated. And my husband said, well, I'm not gonna. And he said, okay. Well, then we need you to test. He's like, okay. And he never tested. Nobody ever followed up with him. I think it's because he's so high up in the system to where they just were like, all right. And he worked from home. Well, actually, he was in charge of, at the time, like I said, the Benelux. So it was 5 or 6 different bases. So he was constantly traveling. He really didn't have a home office or anyone to report to. So maybe that's why they let it go. But they totally were like,
Well, this is what's so frustrating with his entire, and something is wrong with this entire policy that they created. So
inconsistent. It was so inconsistent.
Right.
It was
right.
It was not the same across agencies. It was not the same across branches of the government. It was the same across. Yeah.
It was all left up to the whim of the supervisors.
Yes.
I have been absolutely shocked. There's so many different stories of what happened. We live near a guy who was in the State Department. He worked in finances in the State Department here. They never asked about the vaccines. They sent, I think he put in for some exemption, but they never ever asked for testing, masking. His exemption just went into outer space.
Yeah. And I will say also with the exemptions, we did get an email right before I was let go that said they had put together some kind of task force to decide everybody's religious exemptions. It was like a neutral third party. It was still part of DODEA. It was still part of my agency, but that was who was going to decide. They were going to look at them, and then they would tell us if it was going to be approved or not approved. And again, nothing ever came of that. Nobody.
Illegal.
Yeah, nobody was ever approved or not approved because then the injunction came down, and then it was a holding pattern. But even at that time, I know they were still testing the teachers in the schools. So, but my husband did not have to test, and then that's when we decided, okay, we can't. One, we can't afford to live here. Two, I was scared that they were going to try to push it on him, and that wasn't happening. And it was just, I was like, we got to get back to the States. We were coming up on our 5 years. Stephanie, I told you this. So as a civilian, if you go overseas, you can live there for 5 years. This is thanks to Hillary Clinton, another great contribution from her. But they changed it when she was Secretary of State that you can go overseas for 5 years. If you're really good at what you do, they'll give you an extension up to 7 years. But at 5 years, you have to come back to the United States, and you have to be in the United States for 2 years before you can go back overseas. So at that point, also, we were coming up on 4 years. There wasn't really anywhere else to go. Nobody would take us with only a year left on our billet overseas. So we decided, well, let's just go back stateside, get this 2 years over with, and then we'll go back overseas after that. So we ended up, we tried to go to Key West, which was very dumb because it is very expensive there. But we ended up in Key West. We moved to Key West, was it October? I guess it was when we finally got out of there. Moved to Key West. We got a hotel room on base, and they told us Key West is actually the only place in the United States or anywhere where civilians can live on base because the housing is so expensive in Key West. So they told us, come on down. It'll be about 3 months. We'll get you into base housing. Base housing, great. They pay your rent. You don't have to pay rent. You don't have to pay electricity because you're on base. So I was like, this is kind of great. It's kind of like we're still in Europe. We won't have to pay, we won't have to pay rent, or if we do, it's substantially, less, like maybe $200 a month. The house was small, but we'll make it work, right? We'll go to Key West. That'd be a great place to spend the next 2 years. And plus it's in Florida. So Florida's great, right? So we get to Key West, we get a hotel. And in 3 months to a lot of people sounds like a lot, but when you move with your whole family, you're pretty much in temporary lodging for the first 3 months anyway. You're getting there, you get a hotel, you got to find a house, you got to get a car. So really 3 months in a hotel, 5 of us and a cat, it wasn't great, but it wasn't horrible. So after 3 months, they tell us, oh, by 3 months, we mean 18 months. I said, no, I cannot live in this hotel for 18 months. At this point, we're about to kill each other. It was me and my husband on a full-size bed, my 2 younger ones on a full-size bed, and my oldest on a roll-out hospital-looking bed in this one room with little kitchenette, that we were living on. And I was like, time to find somewhere else. We got to go. We ended up being in Key West for 6 months in that hotel room before we got stationed in Panama City, Florida, which is great right now. We have a nice house. Kids are in school. No masking, no craziness here. Biggest thing I'm dealing with is I'm a substitute, and I'm keeping my eye on, CRT stuff in the classrooms and sexual indoctrination, that kind of thing. That's the biggest challenge we have. But as far as COVID goes, we're done with it. We're over it. It's not happening again. Even I've heard that it's kind of creeping back up in different places. But, right now, my family's good in Florida, taking it day by day and just hopefully waiting on the EEOC to come through and do what, they were set up to do.
The whole EEOC was set up for discrimination. This is the epitome of discrimination. And yet there's just crickets.
Yeah.
Well, it's,
so how did you get...
Oh, go ahead, Steph.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the thing is, the EEOC was set up, I used to think it was there for discrimination, but it's there to protect the government. It's
100%. I 100% agree with that. Yes.
It's there to protect the government. And there are good reasons why it was set up the way it was set up in the beginning. Like I said, 1 or 2 issues here and there you allow the government to continue doing the important work the government is supposed to be doing while dealing with those supposed to be rare events where you have to adjudicate on something that, like an employee-employer dispute. But in this case, this is something completely different. And you've got hundreds and thousands of complaints, and they're all being processed. And to top it all off, they're trying to claim that this discrimination isn't discrimination because you're not a protected class. You're just somebody who didn't want to get vaccinated, which isn't the case. But well, we'll talk about that when we talk about EEO related issues.
That's a really good point, Jim. So how did you get involved with Feds for Freedom?
Probably through Brooke. It just, once you get the snowball rolling, you end up on a Telegram here and a Signal chat there and a Facebook group here. And I think at some point, Feds for Freedom fell into my lap and I started researching it. And then I talked to Brooke and then I talked to everyone else. I'm like, oh, okay, this is not a fringe organization that, it's not taking money and then not doing anything with it. It's not, they're actually doing stuff. They're actually showing work. There's meetings. And so I kind of just started following that way. And it's been probably over a year now, a year and a half probably since I've been attached with you guys.
I've got a request of you then. You're down in the free state of Florida. I love the free state of Florida. In fact, the first time I escaped Deep State Central up in Virginia, I went down to Key West to finally get away from it. And it was a beautiful weekend. My wife had a babysitter, so I was able to go down there and have some time.
Enjoy yourself. Yes.
Oh, it was beautiful. But as Feds for Freedom moves into the next stage of what we're doing is we're trying to address larger issues that affect freedom. And so you're in the beacon of freedom here in the United States. Keep your eye out for other organizations that are operating down in Florida, that are doing good work. We'd like to hear about them. So I want to put that request
I will say really quickly, a little shout out. I am a part of Moms for Freedom. I don't know if you've heard of that, or Moms of Liberty, sorry. But they are on, I think, Merrick Garland's terrorist watch group of all those evil parents trying to watch out for their kids. So I did join that here, and it is a great organization, and they do really good work. So I just want to give it. They started here in Florida, got a bunch of chapters here in Florida. So they are a really good group, Moms for Liberty. So
let's link up after all this is said and done, and we can talk a little bit about that.
They're good people. They're at every school board meeting, making sure that the right thing is supposed to be in the classroom. And again, I've told you guys, my kids they're everything. So I am on it with that as well. And plus I have a lot of time now since I'm not working full time. Some time to just spend on that.
So given all that we've discussed today, if we as Americans can do one thing to combat the corruption that we see, what would it be?
I think we need to learn to say no or stay strong. I think there's a lot of people who say that they agree with you or no, it shouldn't have been mandated. But when it comes to standing up for, themselves, even, they won't. They're too scared. I don't understand. Like, there's nothing they can, I guess there is stuff they can do to you. I think we're coming to the point with technology, they can shut down your bank accounts and who knows what else. I really don't even know what kind of dystopian future, we have to look forward to. But I think if enough people, just stood up and just said, no, we're not doing this. Go about your lives. If you go into a restaurant and they tell you to mask, just tell them no. And if they say you're not eating here, then just leave. If you give in just a little bit, if you put that mask on just to walk to the booth, then you've already conceded and given up that one little piece of dignity, that one piece of freedom that would have been unimaginable 10 years ago.
Well, I just think they need to
say no.
Bravery needs an example. It's not our natural state. It's not anybody's. You're not born brave. It's because you've had examples of people who've done it, and you're like, I want to be like that person. Thankfully, we've got you online here now, and you can serve as that example for folks there.
That's nice of you to say. I don't consider myself, brave or anything like that. I just always had common sense, and I knew when I was with her that there's a better life out there, and falling in line and just taking the easy way, which I saw a lot of people do, especially living in Section 8 housing. You saw very much how it was very easy to get dependent on the government. It was very easy to take that easy life of just food stamps handed out to you, or whatever the case. You can have all this stuff, you can get your nails done, you can buy alcohol and cigarettes, and you can just be this comfortable person. But I didn't want to do that. I knew that I didn't want to do that. As soon as I graduated, which I did really good in high school, at the end of high school, not so much at the beginning, but at the end I did really good, went straight to college, did really great in college. And as soon as I started making the effort, I started seeing my life change. And I think that a lot of people don't think the effort is worth it. And I don't know where that line is drawn for some people. For me, saying no to the COVID shot, for me saying I'm not going to do this, it was worth it. I see it now. I'm seeing it now when I'm seeing so many people get sick. It's just, you've got to be just a little bit extra. You've got to be a little bit more than the next person, or else you're just going to end up like everybody else. And I didn't, something inside me just said that this isn't the right way to go. This isn't the path. Do the path that nobody else is doing. And that's going to get you, above the next person, both academically and in this situation. I just said, okay, if everyone's going down this path, and to me, it doesn't look right. You have this feeling, you have to know. I think a lot of people who got the vaccine knew. They knew it wasn't right. But they did it anyway. And I'm not sure where that insecurity comes from. I'm not sure where that lack of confidence to say no comes from. When I didn't let my husband get it, or when we talked about it, I can't live without him. Like, I can't do this. God forbid nothing happens to him. But if he lost his job, if we both were working triple shifts at McDonald's to make ends meet, I would still have him in our family, as opposed to if he died of myocarditis. Where's the benefit in that? Like, okay, he got to work for another 3 years and I get military benefits. It's not worth it. So I think people just need to really look around and say, what is important? What matters? You can't take some stuff with you. You can take memories with you. You can take experiences with you. Fancy cars, fancy houses, that all fades away. So I think that's important to think about.
Wow. Thank you so much, Holly. You really are an inspiration. I hope that other people hearing you, that they stand strong and they stand up. It takes one person to start a whole line. Thank you so much, Holly. Thank you for coming on today.
Absolutely. Anytime. It was a pleasure to meet both of you. And stay strong, everybody.
Up next week, we interview another Department of Defense Education Activities employee, this time a DODEA elementary grade teacher of 14 years. Brooke Stadler, while in Germany, refused the COVID shots due to her religious beliefs and was forced to resign from her teaching position. She has now started her own tutoring business and has just published her first book. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share this episode. We'll see you next week.